Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2020 Meet Magento UK Technical Track. We have an amazing lineup today. This year, we're going to be focusing on bringing more amazing speakers from across the world to cover a broad range of topics, everything from scaling, project health, through to performance and progressive web apps. I know it's not quite the mermaid, but we're going to have one hell of a day. Let's get started with our first session. Throughout this period we've been operating in, we need to be working with people who always have our back. Our next speaker is exactly one of those. Amy and the Akoova team have personally had my back over the years. Last month, we saw clients scaling nearly 20 times in a single day without a blip. So I want you to all give a warm digital welcome to Amy Swan from Akoova on cloud scaling Magento from basics to complex.
Hi everyone, I'm Amy from Akoova. For those that don't know, Akoova are a hosting platform for Magento sites, and we do have a booth. If you want to find out any more, head over there. So a little bit of background about myself. I've been in the DevOps space now for the last few years. Prior to that, my experience is in sysadmin and front-end design. Before starting my career in tech, I come from a fashion background and e-commerce customer service facing. So today I'm going to be talking to you about how you can improve your infrastructure and your scaling for your Magento site, and we'll be looking at infrastructure in AWS today. So I'm going to start just by going over a few scaling terms and introducing you to some infrastructure diagrams that will be showing up in the presentation. So the infrastructure diagrams in the presentation aren't labelled. So the icons that you'll see coming up are on this page. As you can see, we've got auto-scaling groups, availability zones, see your various database icons, EC2 instances, load balancers, Redis, and your Elastic file systems. An example of them in a basic infrastructure diagram will look something like this. So here you can see you've got front-end instances in 2 availability zones within an auto-scaling group. You've got an admin instance in a separate auto-scaling group. You've got a multi-AZ database, and you've got a Redis cluster there as well. So just thinking of some scaling terms quite high level, to increase or decrease capacity by increasing or decreasing the size of your instances is known as vertical scaling. You may also hear that referred to as scaling up or down. By contrast, if you add or remove instances to increase or decrease resource, that's called horizontal scaling or scaling in or out. So auto scaling is an example of horizontal scaling, by which you add or remove instances from an auto scaling group using scaling policies. After adding these screenshots, I did notice these are badly named scaling policies, as we've called them scale up or scale down, but technically it's scale out or scale in. And in this example, we're scaling based on CPU utilization of the instances. So when CPU utilization is over a certain threshold, we'll add an instance, or when it drops below, we'll remove instances. But you can use different metrics for that monitoring if you wanted to. And so auto-scaling should be used for our regular day-to-day traffic. We shouldn't be relying on auto-scaling for all of our scaling requirements. A good example of why we shouldn't be doing that is, for example, if our traffic was to do this. So this was a genuine increase in traffic caused by a product launch. And we had pre-scaled for this particular example, but let's think about if we hadn't pre-scaled and we were just relying on auto-scaling. So zooming in on that initial peak in traffic there, you can see that traffic went 20-fold in the space of half an hour. So at, say, that point there, just thinking of front-end instances in your auto-scaling group. Let's say you had 2 instances in play under their scale-up threshold and your maximum was set to 8. By that point there, your front end would have reached capacity, give or take a few minutes. So within the orange section, factoring in the time for the new instances to boot up and start serving requests, you would have seen degraded performance on your site. In the second section, the red part, with just auto scaling, that graph would have looked very different. You would have had a site outage. Your on-call team would have been alerted, and I'd imagine your business team probably wouldn't be very happy either. So how can we plan ahead of time to reduce the chance of this happening again? So we can plan and scale proactively. This does require good communication between teams, particularly from a business front and the tech team. If business team have an event planned, say product launch or marketing email, where an increase in traffic is expected, tech are going to need to know about that ahead of time for this to work. So to start with this, it's a good idea to get an idea of what you currently have and to give you a baseline for future scaling. So review your current infrastructure, check the site performance, and think about how quickly you can make changes currently. And to do that, there are a number of monitoring tools available. For example, you could use Amazon CloudWatch or Datadog to review your infrastructure resource usage. New Relic is a handy tool for looking at site performance, and for more detailed information about traffic, you could look at Google Analytics. Obviously, there are a number of other tools available. They're just examples. So once you've got an idea of where you currently are, you need to have a think about what you'd like to improve with your changes. So is your infrastructure currently under or over provisioned? Is there a lot of time to make changes at the moment? Is there downtime when you make changes? Or are there bottlenecks in your infrastructure? And with them changes, what are you looking to improve? So is it increasing availability of your infrastructure and scaling, improving site performance, or reducing costs? So once you've had a thought about what changes you want to make and what you're looking to change from them changes, we need to make a plan of the scaling or infrastructure changes that we're going to make. This is really important and can save a lot of problems. So once you've got a plan, write it down somewhere, whether it's in Slack, a ticket, documentation, anywhere. And once you're happy with the scaling or change plan, communicate this to all relevant teams, people. So if your changes are likely to cause an on-call alert, let the on-call person know. If there's likely to be impact to the front end, let the business team know so they're aware. And then stick to the plan when you make the changes. So thinking of a few examples of proactive scaling and tools that we can use. AWS scheduled scaling allows you to either create scheduled actions to bring in resource at a certain time, or you can schedule modifications in maintenance windows which you can set. So with the maintenance windows, for example, you can schedule database changes. Generally with them, there is a small period of downtime, so they can be scheduled out of hours, so when your traffic is quieter. They're auto-scaling group scheduled actions with the example on the left. Just go to the next slide. You can use to add or remove EC2 instances from your auto-scaling group at a set time. So these are great if you know there's going to be marketing activity or product launch, for example. So you can scale in additional instances to come up, say, half an hour before the mail out time, and then they'll be ready to serve requests at the time of the activity. As a word of warning on here, be very careful using the desired. The desired amount in the scheduled action will overwrite the number of instances currently in play. So if your desired, for example, is set to 4 in your scheduled action, but you've already got 6 instances in service, it will take that down to 4, which will likely affect the front end if this is your front end instances. So as a general rule, we tend to just use the minimum values for that. So again, with scheduled actions, you can set them on a recurring basis to save you even more time setting schedules. So if you know the same thing's going to happen at a set time every day or every week, you can set the same schedules there to scale out a set time and scale back in. For more sort of vertical scaling changes, there are a ton of automation tools available to help speed that up, reduce downtime, sort of help with rolling changes. I've named just a few on this page. I'm not going to go in details of these because they are quite a personal preference to the either person or team. So the best thing to do for them, try a few out, see what works for you. So thinking a bit about scaling of databases. If you use any reporting applications that are quite database resource heavy, a good way to stop customers being affected by sort of high database usage from your application is to create a read replica instance. This can be a smaller instance size than your main DB, and then you can use a SQL user for that for your reporting applications. Your reporting application only uses the resource of the read replica. So if it was to use all the resource, it won't affect your front end or your customers. For a really high availability, scalability and performance database, Aurora would be your best option. It would look like that. So you have your replica instances, which unlike other RDS instance types, they're in high availability mode. So failover is really quick. Generally it fails over within about 30 seconds, which can also help with scaling changes. So you can do really fast scaling changes on Aurora and see minimum impact on the front end. Equally, to reduce the impact further, you can schedule the changes sort of out of hours using the scheduled changing that I showed you earlier. And quickly thinking about Elasticache Redis, to scale that, we can enable multi-AZ, which gives us higher availability. And we could split our Redis sessions and Redis cache, which would allow us to scale them independently if required. So we've thought about scaling different parts of the infrastructure that we currently have, but what happens if we're seeing bottlenecks in this? So for that, we can start to decouple services so we can scale them independently of each other. So for example, in this diagram, as you can see, we've got a separate varnish layer with varnish instances in their own auto-scaling group. So that way we can scale varnish and our front-end nodes separately, dependent on requirements. Thinking about a slightly different version of that, you could separate your API nodes into their own auto-scaling group. So all your API requests can go to their own instances, that way taking traffic away from your front-end nodes. So it should improve availability. And again, you can scale them independently of each other. So combining a bit of the two, as you can see, you've got your separate API nodes and you've got your varnish nodes in front of your front-end nodes. And if we can do that, there's no reason why you wouldn't want to do that. Generally, with this sort of infrastructure, it would likely be quite a high traffic site. You'd probably also see an Aurora DB with that, and definitely multi-AZ Redis as well for your high availability. So thinking of once we've scaled our existing infrastructure, what would happen if we had two separate platforms that we needed to scale? So in this example, I'm using PWA as the two platforms. So we've got Magento at one side, PWA the other. As you can see by the graphs at the bottom, I will zoom in on them in a second. The load for either side is very different, so we need to be able to scale them independently of each other. Just zoom in on them graphs. So the top one there is the Magento load, and bottom is from the PWA containers. So obviously, as you can imagine, if they were combined together, scaling wouldn't be very efficient because their traffic profile, their load profile is very different. For this example, I'm not going to go too much into detail of PWA, but PWA is scaled very similar to Magento side and is based on auto-scaling metrics. So we've had to think about what we currently have and how we can improve that. So what do we do now? So we need to regularly review our infrastructure. Things change, like you get seasonal ups and downs in traffic. I mean, it may stay constant throughout the year, but at least seasonally, check what's going on with the infrastructure. I'd also recommend documenting any scaling changes that you make. A great tool that we've done recently is we've started making profiles for each of our clients. So we have sort of regular traffic, high traffic, really high traffic, and then we put all of the required node sizes under each of them. So when we have to scale, even if it's really last minute, we've got all of that information there. So we don't need to go looking around for what we need to scale to. Monitoring and alerting, definitely set both of them up, and also set alerting not just for when your infrastructure is at high resource usage, also set it for when it's really low. You don't want to be burning money, essentially, if it's not being used. That will allow you to then scale things down or bring scaling in. And obviously think of ways you can continually improve. If you're starting to see bottlenecks, think about how you can reduce them. And also communication is obviously key. If you're going to proactively scale, you need to know about the events that are going to happen before they happen. So you need to build good relationships between your business and your tech teams, and ideally find out about any planned events with as much notice as possible, so you can get the scaling planned in advance. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Amy. So we have our first question, is how come you decided on Varnish instead of CloudFront?
Oh, to be honest, they are just examples. You could do something similar with CloudFront if you were to want to. That's just sort of a high level example of what you could do.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen quite a few conversations asked about the benefit, pros and cons of each, and some of it comes down to like the number of nodes with something like CloudFront that you're not always as guaranteed to get a hit, especially if you're quite regionalized. But one question from me actually, with how do you manage with customers to communicate effectively to you when there are going to be big peaks? Because I know from like my history, all of a sudden you start getting alerts that a site's going crazy and you realize that a massive campaign's gone out or someone's appeared on TV.
I mean, it's not going to work all the time. There are occasions where things happen which aren't expected. But generally, like a Slack message, even half an hour before, because I know marketing can be quite a last minute to react to what's going on sort of in that sector. So even half an hour before gives us some time to add in extra resource to at least minimize that impact. But like a Slack message, sort of if it's within the same company, just like however they communicate, just some message saying we've got marketing going out at X time, we expect roughly how much of an increase in traffic is normally sufficient just to add in, even if it's like emergency, just throw in some horizontal scaling in the ASGs and not a full scale up. It would be better than nothing.
We've got another question here. Is it a good idea to use a database with multi-master and its own infrastructure, similar to how Magento Cloud does it?
Sorry, say that again?
Is it a good idea to use a database within a multi-master in its own infrastructure, similar to how Magento Cloud does it? So you write to multiple masters at the same time?
I'm not sure on the answer to
Uh,
that. Sorry.
I think what they're referring to is you can split the databases out with commerce, and you can write to different masters at the same time.
Yeah, so I've like in my experience, I've never come across that, so I couldn't answer that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I'd say as well, you've got to get some serious scale before you start.
Yeah, you would need sort of very, very high throughput site, I'd imagine, for that to even become feasible.
Yeah, you're looking.
I've not used that, so I can't really comment.
Yeah, you're looking at probably hundreds of orders a second.
Yeah, it
really
would need to be a lot, because there'd obviously be a cost impact on that as well.
So, unless there is any other questions from the room, thank you very much. I'd like to direct everyone towards Akoova in the expo room. It's been lovely to have you, Amy.
Thank you.
And we are back at 10:55 for Web Vitals with Gilberto. Thank you, everyone.